My girlfriend said on Instagram Live, "I'm only dating him for the green card. Americans are so gullible." Her coworker was recording for Instagram. ICE saw the video. She was deported before she could explain. I testified at her hearing that she'd admitted to marriage fraud. She's banned from returning for 10 years. All right, Reddit, buckle up. I never thought I'd be the guy typing out one of these long, messy morality tales with a federal agency cameo and a comment section guaranteed to split 50-50 between "you did the right thing" and "you're a snitch." But here I am. I'm a 31M engineer in the Midwest. I've had the same apartment for 5 years, 2 succulents I keep forgetting to water, and a calendar that lives and dies by Outlook invites. My girlfriend, now very ex, was 27F. We'll call her Lean. Costa Rican, laughed with her whole face, could turn a $12 thrift store dress into runway material, and was terrifyingly good at Wordle. We met at a coffee shop after I moved out of my last relationship. She was sketching storefronts in ink at the corner table, earbuds in, hair up in a clip like a punctuation mark. I asked what she was drawing. She said, "A place I'm not homesick in." I was gone within 5 minutes. I didn't know anything about visas beyond the basic, "There are paperwork mazes and lines at embassies." She was here on OPT after a master's in architecture. Translation: she could work, but there was a clock. She hated the clock. She was brilliant at facade studies and passive cooling tricks and drilling holes in foam core at 3 a.m. But the anxiety under all that competence was a living thing. The first time she cried in front of me, it wasn't about me or a fight. It was at the post office when an envelope with her dad's handwriting arrived 6 weeks late. She held the paper like it hurt to touch something that had traveled across oceans to find her. I'm not stupid. I know the cliche. American guy, foreign girlfriend, green card jokes. We joked too at first. She'd say, "If I marry you, it's only for your Costco membership." And I'd say, "You mean my dental plan?" But under the jokes was gravity. By month 8, we were sharing groceries and bed space, and the kind of arguments you only bother to have when you're already imagining the same future. The immigration stress was constant background noise in our relationship. She'd get panic attacks checking the news about policy changes. I'd find her at 2 a.m. reading forums where people shared horror stories about delays and denials. She kept a folder with every document she'd ever received from USCIS, organized by date with color-coded tabs. When other people complained about their jobs, she'd go quiet because she knew how quickly employed could become deportable. Her friends were scattered across similar situations. Some had found company sponsors, others had married American citizens. A few had given up and gone home. There was this whole invisible network of people living on borrowed time, comparing lawyers and sharing updates about processing delays. Lean would come back from their coffee dates looking like she'd been to a support group for people with terminal diagnoses. My family liked her immediately. My mom said she had good energy, which in Midwestern mom speak means, "This one won't break your heart." My dad appreciated that she asked intelligent questions about his work and remembered details from previous conversations. At family dinners, she'd help clear the table without being asked, and somehow always knew exactly how to fold the napkins back the way my mom preferred. But there were cultural gaps I hadn't anticipated. She'd go quiet during discussions about politics or current events, not because she didn't have opinions, but because she was calculating whether expressing them might somehow end up in a file somewhere. When my uncle made his usual jokes about immigrants at Thanksgiving, I saw her face shut down like someone had flipped a switch. Later, she told me she'd spent the rest of the meal wondering if he was the type to make anonymous reports. The future became a real conversation on the kind of night people post about. Warm, June, air that smelled like grilled corn and dryer vent. We were at my friend Jake's rooftop making small talk about battery storage. Lean leaned close and said so quietly I almost missed it, "I don't want to go." The balloon of a sentence sat between us. I squeezed her knee, said we'd figure it out. That was the first time the word marriage showed up in the conversation, not as a joke, but as a fix. Not a ring and roses fix. A practical, legal immigration fix. She didn't push. I didn't promise. We did what couples do with big, uncooperative problems. We put band-aids on them. We studied company sponsorship pages. We made spreadsheets. We called one lawyer who sounded like a game show host and another who sounded like a funeral director. She hated feeling transactional, hated that a love story might have to carry a notary stamp. "If we do it, it has to be real," she said. "I won't be a story people roll their eyes at." The law firm consultations were educational in the most depressing way possible. The first lawyer, Mr. Morrison, had an office that smelled like old coffee and defeat. He explained that marriage-based applications were under increasing scrutiny, that couples had to prove their relationship was bona fide through joint bank accounts, lease agreements, photos spanning years, testimony from friends and family. The interview process could take 2 years and included questions about everything from sleeping positions to brand preferences. "The government assumes you're lying," he said, sliding a retainer agreement across his desk. "Your job is to prove them wrong with documentation." The second lawyer, Miss Chen, was more encouraging, but not more optimistic. Her office had better lighting and plants that weren't dying, but the message was the same. The process was expensive, invasive, and could fail for reasons that had nothing to do with the authenticity of the relationship. "Even legitimate couples get denied," she explained. "Sometimes it's bad timing. Sometimes it's bad luck. Sometimes it's an officer having a bad day. There are no guarantees." We left both meetings feeling like we'd been handed instructions for defusing a bomb while blindfolded. Enter the work party. Lean worked at a boutique design firm that did pop-up retail build-outs and experiential brand spaces, which I think is fancy for rooms that smell like a specific candle and make you want to buy very expensive sneakers. They were throwing their winter party at this warehouse space that pretends it's a gallery, but is really a bar with better lighting. If you've been to one, you've been to all. Neon sign for selfies, DJ who knows exactly one Dua Lipa song, craft beer that tastes like a grapefruit fought a pine tree and lost. The firm had landed a big contract with a national retailer, and everyone was celebrating like they'd cured cancer instead of designing a slightly different way to display handbags. Lean had been working 60-hour weeks on the project, coming home with ink stains on her fingers, and that particular exhaustion that comes from being creative on command. Her co-workers were the usual mix of overconfident 26-year-olds and industry veterans who dressed like they were still 26. They all spoke in marketing phrases and had strong opinions about fonts. I'd met most of them at previous events and could never remember their names, but they were generally harmless, except for Madison. Madison was one of those people who treat social media like a full-time job. She had maybe 800 followers but posted like she was an influencer, complete with ring lights and branded hashtags. She documented everything: her morning coffee routine, her workout playlists, her thoughts on seasonal color palettes. The kind of person who would film herself crying if she thought it would get engagement. I had a good time. I wore a blazer for the first time since my cousin's wedding and successfully didn't spill anything on it. I met Lean's bosses, who all wore black turtlenecks like it was a uniform. People toasted the new year. Someone started a conga line ironically, and then it got less ironic. Around 11, Madison decided to do a party recap on Instagram Live. You know the type, going around with her phone, making people say things for her content. She was asking everyone about their New Year's resolutions, their biggest accomplishments from last year, their hopes and dreams and favorite pizza toppings. People were drunk enough to play along. She pointed the camera at Lean and me. I threw an arm around Lean and said something generic about travel and new adventures. Lean laughed, tucked hair behind her ear, rolled her eyes in that way that meant she was performing a little. And then, God, I can replay this with the audio burned in. She leaned into the phone and said, "I'm only dating him for the green card. Americans are so gullible." It was a joke the way a loaded gun on a table is a prop in Act 1. Madison cackled like she'd captured the crown jewel of TikTok. I felt the air change around me like heat coming off a highway. The guy by the speakers pumped his fist and went, "Aye!" Other people turned to look, some laughing, some looking uncomfortable. I stood there with my mouth open just enough to feel cold on my molars. Lean shot me a sideways look, then immediately added, "Kidding, kidding," with both hands up. Madison, already uploading the clip to her story, said, "Savage," and moved on to the next ring light target. Lean said, and then, "It was a joke." She squeezed my hand. I squeezed back, but I did it because my body has muscle memory for her. My brain was sprinting barefoot down a dark hallway, trying to find which door had the light behind it. The ride home was tense in the way that small spaces amplify discomfort. The Uber driver had the radio on some late-night talk show where people called in to complain about their neighbors. Lean sat with her phone out, already typing frantic messages to Madison about deleting the clip. I watched the city slide past the window and tried to figure out why I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. "It was just a dumb joke," she said, not looking up from her screen. "You know I don't think of you like that." "I know," I said, but I wasn't sure I did. The joke had come out so easily, so naturally, like it was something she'd thought before. The worst part wasn't the words themselves. It was how comfortable she'd looked saying them. "Madison says she'll delete it," she said, showing me the text exchange. But Madison's response was non-committal. LOL okay if you really want me to, followed by, but it was hilarious. We fought in gentle, exhausted sentences when we got back to my apartment. I said, you know people don't hear the italics when they don't know you. She said, you know I don't think of you like that. I said the immigration stuff was stressful enough without jokes that could be taken out of context. She said she was tired of walking on eggshells about every casual comment. I can't police every word that comes out of my mouth, she said, sitting on my couch with her knees pulled up. I was trying to be funny. I was trying to fit in with people who make jokes about everything. But that's not a thing you joke about when you're actually going through it, I said. That's like joking about having cancer when you're in chemo. She was quiet for a long time after that. We went to sleep with our backs doing that choreography where they face each other, but not quite touch. The video stayed up 4 hours. Long enough. I didn't know ICE accounts could look like any other account. I didn't know about the exact people who scroll the exact hashtags that line up with work event, visa life, architecture, immigrant jokes. The clip didn't go viral in a social media sense. It got 312 views according to the metrics Madison showed me later. It went viral in a federal sense. Someone flagged it. Someone opened a file. Someone typed our names into a database. The algorithm that governs what federal agents see is apparently not much different from the one that decides which ads follow you around the internet. Lean's Instagram was public. She used hashtags like hashtag OPTLife and hashtag immigrant journey and hashtag visa processing in previous posts. The party video appeared in a feed alongside other content tagged with immigration-related keywords. To a casual observer, it might have looked like a genuine confession, rather than a poorly timed joke. The knock came on a Wednesday 2 weeks later. I was at work fishing a granola bar out of my desk when Lean sent me, "Can you talk?" with the sort of punctuation that looks like handshaking. I called. She was crying without the dramatic inhale, the way people cry when they're skipping to the part where breathing is optional. "They're at the office," she said. "They're asking questions." She was trying to sound like she had authority inside of it. Like maybe the asking was something she could manage if she used the right professional voice. I drove. I am not a speeding guy, but every red light felt like a personal failure. I parked badly and sprinted into an atrium where 2 agents in windbreakers looked exactly like TV imagines them. Polite, tired, carrying the absolute opposite of a selfie ring light. They were already done with the politeness by the time I got there. Lean's face was chalk white and blotchy. Her boss was hovering and pale, clearly calculating how this would affect the firm's reputation. Madison was in a chair with her knees locked together, like a kid in the principal's office, her phone nowhere in sight for once. An agent asked me to confirm my name and whether I was the boyfriend in question. I said yes. They asked if we lived together, mostly yes, and if we'd ever discussed marriage. We had, like normal, like everyone does. Like it's not a felony to talk about your future. Then they asked if Lean had ever said explicitly that she was with me to obtain permanent residency. The truth was sitting in the room with us on a 5.4-inch screen, framed in rose gold plastic. The agent held the phone up like a priest with a wafer. Madison had turned over her phone without hesitation, probably thinking cooperation would somehow absolve her of responsibility. Lean kept saying, "It was a joke," and then, "It was a bad joke," and then, "I didn't mean it like that," until the sentences became a single exhausted chord. If there's a way to convince a professional listener that the worst possible version of a sentence was the least true, we didn't find it in that atrium under those pendant lights with a neon "Design Happens Here" sign winking pink in the corner. They took her for an interview. They said, "You can come down to Federal Building Exit Y," with the tone of people who say this 100 times a week. I drove behind the car and practiced sentences in my head, like there would be a test. We love each other. We were planning to marry eventually. She's not a fraud. She's a person who is afraid of a clock. If you've never sat in a waiting room designed for people in trouble, it has a sound. The air conditioner is a little too loud. The vending machine is always humming. Every chair has a story trapped in it, and the fabric is pilled to hell. Everyone who works there is efficient in a way that makes you grateful and furious at the same time. I sat next to a man who kept checking his watch, and a woman who was crying so quietly, I wasn't sure she was actually crying until I saw the tissues piling up in her purse. The building itself felt designed to make you feel small. High ceilings that echoed footsteps, fluorescent lighting that made everyone look sick, security checkpoints that reminded you that this was a place where the government decided who belonged and who didn't. I watched people come and go through the metal detectors, trying to read their faces for clues about how these conversations usually ended. They called me back after 2 hours. The agent on Lean's interview had a voice like a DMV line. He asked me the questions you might be ready for if you'd looked up marriage fraud interview BuzzFeed quiz in advance. What side of the bed does she sleep on? What brand of toothbrush does she use? What's the name of her aunt who sent her that birthday card with the pressed flowers? The questions felt randomly specific until I realized the point isn't the answers. It's how you know them. I answered everything correctly because I actually did know her. I knew she slept on the right side because she liked being closer to the window. I knew she used the purple Oral-B toothbrush because she'd bought a 2-pack and given me the blue one. I knew her Aunt Carmen's handwriting because Lean had shown me the card, laughing about how the pressed flowers had made her homesick for her grandmother's garden. Then came the larger, cold question. Had she ever admitted to me, explicitly or implicitly, that marriage to me would be primarily for immigration status? Everything in me wanted to say no. Not because it was entirely true, we had talked about the visa, had traced outlines around the fix, but because the word primarily is a guillotine with grammar on it. I said we had talked about marriage in the context of our life together. I said we understood it had immigration consequences, but that it wasn't the point. He nodded without writing anything, which felt worse than if he'd been taking notes. They held her. Not overnight. A hold that sounds like a coffee shop order, but is really a 12-hour legal silhouette that lets them draw lines around next steps. She called me from a room with linoleum that has scuffs you could map. She said sorry so many times the word frayed. I could hear other voices in the background, other people making similar calls to people they loved who couldn't help them. Madison deleted the video that night, but not before several people had screen recorded it. The clip lived on in text message threads and group chats, passed around like evidence in a case we didn't know we were part of. People who barely knew us were suddenly experts on immigration law and relationship authenticity. Her coworker posted a black square that said, "Be careful what you joke about," and turned off comments. It was the social media equivalent of thoughts and prayers. Performative concern that cost nothing and helped no one. The notice to appear took 4 weeks. The legal document that summoned her to immigration court was addressed to my apartment, since that's where she'd been staying most nights. It arrived on a Tuesday in a manila envelope that looked like every other piece of government mail until you opened it and realized it was a countdown timer to deportation. Her OPT was expiring in the meantime. Her boss tried to be a hero and called a congressperson's office, but the aide who took the call explained that they couldn't intervene in active cases. A lawyer with a beautiful website took a retainer from us and then told us, in the gentlest possible tone, that a recorded admission of fraudulent intent, even if joke, was gasoline in a room full of cigarettes. "Intent is the dragon here," he said, spreading our case file across his conference table. "They don't have to prove a sham marriage happened. They just have to believe you meant one." We had 2 options on paper. 1. Get married now, file for adjustment of status, fight like hell, argue sincerity, survive credibility interviews, hope someone believes that the worst 5 seconds of sarcasm ever captured were not the thesis of our relationship. Or 2. Don't marry, show up to immigration court, and pray for discretion that rarely comes when there's video and a caption with 3 laughing crying emojis. The lawyer laid out the statistics. Marriage cases with fraud allegations had about a 30% success rate, and that was before social media evidence. Court cases where the person was already in removal proceedings had even lower odds. Either way, we were looking at years of legal battles, tens of thousands in attorney fees, and no guarantees. "The video is the problem," he said. "Everything else is manageable. But those words, in that context, with that audience, it's going to follow you through every interview, every hearing, every appeal." We fought about it in circles that left us dizzy. Lean would say, "If we get married now, they'll think it's for them, not for us." I'd say, "If we don't, they'll say there's no bond to even pretend weighed against intent." Sometimes we were quiet and held hands. Sometimes we were raw as wire. The question, "Do you want to marry me?" started as a love question and became a legal trapdoor. And there is no way to describe how corrupting that is, unless you've had to taste it. Our friends had opinions. Jake thought we should get married and fight it out in court. "You love each other," he said. "That's what matters. The government can't read your hearts." My sister thought we should break up cleanly and let Lean find another path. "You're both young," she said. "Don't let the government force you into something you're not ready for." Lean's friends were split along similar lines. The ones who'd successfully married American citizens said we should go for it. The ones who were still fighting their own immigration battles said the system was too rigged to trust. The ones who'd given up and gone home said at least she'd know where she stood. We didn't get married. We told ourselves we would not let the government use our love as a prop. It was noble. it was maybe stupid. But it felt like the only way to preserve something authentic in a process designed to strip authenticity away. Her hearing date got set. If you've never watched a docket, it looks like a spreadsheet someone bled on. Names you can sing, names your mouth isn't sure how to hold, ages, countries, statutes that look like algebra. The day before, our lawyer prepped us for 3 hours in his conference room. Answer what they ask, he said. Don't volunteer. Don't guess. Don't get cute. He looked at me. If they ask you whether she ever said the word green card as a reason to date or marry you, you have to tell the truth. If you lie for her and they know it, they don't just wreck her case. They wreck you. I spent that night staring at the ceiling, playing out different versions of testimony in my head. In some versions, I found a way to tell the truth that didn't sound like a confession. In others, I lied smoothly and convinced everyone. In the worst versions, I told the truth and watched Lean get handcuffed in a courtroom. None of the versions ended with us going home together to argue about what to watch on Netflix. We didn't sleep. One of my succulents finally gave up. It leaned sideways like a tiny drunk and fell out of its pot, scattering soil across my kitchen counter like a metaphor I was too tired to unpack. Court was cold. The judge had hair that said she didn't have time for it. The room smelled like old carpet and institutional disinfectant. ICE counsel had the video queued on a laptop that looked older than the relationship it was about to dissect. They played it without volume first, then with volume, then again with volume. You know how your voice sounds weird on tape? Imagine your girlfriend's worst sentence playing on a government laptop, looped like a bad TikTok trend, while men in suits watch your face for tells. Lean testified first. She was good until she wasn't. She explained the context of the party, her stress levels, her sense of humor that didn't always translate well. She talked about our relationship timeline, our shared interests, our future plans that had nothing to do with immigration status. She said joke too many times. She cried at the wrong question. She said, I love him, and it sounded like a prayer no one was interested in hearing. ICE counsel asked whether she'd ever complained to friends about the visa clock. She said yes because she's honest. The counsel asked whether she had ever framed marriage as a way to solve her status problem. She said, we talked about that, and I felt the floor tilt. She was telling the truth, but the truth was wearing handcuffs. The government's case was straightforward. She had publicly admitted to dating an American citizen for immigration benefits. The video provided evidence of intent. Her testimony confirmed that she had discussed marriage in the context of solving her status problem. Everything else, the genuine affection, the shared experiences, the authentic relationship, was irrelevant if the primary motivation was fraudulent. Our lawyer tried to rehabilitate her testimony on redirect, but the damage was done. You can't unring a bell, and you can't unsay words that were recorded for posterity and federal scrutiny. Then it was my turn. I don't know how to explain standing up, knowing that your sentence could keep someone you love, or push them out of the building into the long conveyor belt that takes you to an airport you don't want. I put my hand on a book and promised to tell the truth. Truth can be a jealous God, can be a jealous. They asked me when we met, how often we fought, who cooks, who hates cilantro, whether we had a joint bank account, no. Joint lease, no, but a drawer full of her stuff. Joint Netflix, yes. Standard relationship verification questions that felt like a quiz show, where the wrong answer meant deportation. I answered everything honestly and thoroughly. We met at a coffee shop in March. We fought maybe once a week about normal stuff. Dishes, temperature settings, whether putting ketchup on eggs is a crime against humanity. She cooked because she was better at it. I handled takeout orders. Neither of us hated cilantro, but she used it in everything and I'd learned to like it. We talked about joint accounts, but hadn't opened any because we were both financially cautious. Then ICE counsel leaned on the lectern like he was at a bar and said, Mr. Did Ms. ever admit to you in words or meaning that she was with you primarily to obtain immigration benefits? The question hung in the air like a smoke alarm going off. Everyone in the courtroom was looking at me. The judge, the lawyers, Lean, the court reporter whose fingers were poised over her keyboard waiting for my answer. I could hear the ventilation system and someone's stomach growling, and my own heartbeat in my ears. I could have said no if I wanted to treat words like loose change. I could have said, never, not once, and it would have been 80% true and 20% the lie that would follow me like a low battery alert, beeping at 3 a.m. forever. Or I could say the thing that felt like stepping on a rake. I looked at Lean. Her face was pale and desperate, and I could see her trying to telepathically communicate with me across the courtroom. I looked at our lawyer, whose expression was carefully neutral, but whose hand was gripping his pen like he was trying to strangle it. I looked at the judge, who was waiting with the patience of someone who had heard every possible version of this conversation. I said, she said sometimes she felt like our marriage would also fix her status. She never said it was the only reason, but yes, she said it would fix it. The words came out steady and clear, like I'd been practicing them, which I had, in my head, for days. It was the most honest version of the truth I could manage, acknowledging the conversations we'd had while emphasizing that they weren't the foundation of our relationship. Our lawyer's mouth tightened almost imperceptibly. Lean's face crumpled like paper. ICE counsel looked satisfied in the way people do when a spreadsheet cell autofills the way they wanted. The judge made a note without changing expression. The government asked a few follow-up questions, trying to get me to expand on my answer or provide more damaging details. I stuck to what I'd already said. Yes, we'd discussed the immigration benefits of marriage. No, it wasn't presented as the primary reason for our relationship. Yes, she was aware that marrying me would solve her status problem. No, I didn't believe that was her main motivation for dating me. The judge asked a few more questions without much heat. She thanked us. She said the law is what it is. She said the word inadmissibility, like a librarian saying overdue. She said 10-year bar, the way a meteorologist says storm front. The numbers fell like stones. 10 years before she could apply to return. 10 years of exile for a 5-second joke. We walked out into air that didn't feel like it belonged to us anymore. The courthouse steps were crowded with other people having other legal crises, but we moved through them like ghosts. Lean didn't look at me until we reached my car, and when she did, her eyes were red but dry. "You told the truth," she said. Not angry, not surprised, just stating a fact. "I had to," I said. "I couldn't lie under oath." "I know," she said. "I know." I drove Lean to my place because hers had already become a storage unit of boxes. We didn't talk much. She sat on the floor with her back to my couch and stared at our crooked IKEA bookshelf like it might give a TED talk on unfairness. Finally, she said, "I made a joke and now my life is a suitcase." I said nothing smarter than, "I'm sorry," which felt like saying, "The ocean is wet." The deportation process is mostly logistics wrapped in heartbreak. There were calls to her family, arrangements for shipping her belongings, decisions about what to keep and what to leave behind. Her parents booked a flight for her return, speaking in rapid Spanish during long phone calls that I couldn't understand, but whose emotional content was unmistakable. There's a lot they don't tell you about deportation that anyone who's done any airport drop-off can guess. It is logistics. There were calls. There were forms. Her mom cried on a video call while adjusting the scarf around her shoulders for grief. Her dad said very calmly that he was proud of her and that some rooms are too small for the truth. Her little cousin sent a WhatsApp voice note that said, "Vuelve pronto," in 8th grade Spanish that stabbed me clean through. I bought a new suitcase because hers had a broken zipper. I packed it wrong twice, and she repacked it with the efficiency of someone who can do emotional Tetris. We labeled everything like the labels would keep this from being chaos. I printed her boarding pass and triple-checked the times like flight delays are caused by not respecting numbers enough. The morning of, the city was all glittering indifference. We didn't talk much in the car. At one red light, she started laughing. This brittle, exhausted laugh. Because the radio had the audacity to play a sappy song about staying. "The universe is rude," she said. I said, "It's unoriginal." At the curb, we hugged. I wanted the hug to do more than hugs can do. She said, "I'm sorry for..." And I said, "Don't," because the sentence would be long and wrong in every direction. She went in. I sat in my car with my hands on the wheel, like if I let go, something would float away. I went home to the plant that refused to die out of spite. I watered it like we were going to be okay. My friends took turns bringing me food and opinions. My dad said, "You didn't betray her. She set fire to a thing, and you told the fire marshal where the gasoline was." My mom said, "We do not build a life on lies." My friend Jake said, "I would have lied." And I believed him, and also didn't think he would have. Not when a judge with hair like that said, "Under oath." Lean called from her parents' kitchen a week later. The tile behind her was terracotta orange. She said the coffee at the airport was terrible. She said the customs line at home was weirdly efficient. She said her aunt hugged her so hard her ribs popped. She said, "I know what you did in court." And I said, "I know." And we let the double meaning sit quietly in the corner between us. We tried the long-distance thing for exactly 9 days. Not out of hope, out of muscle memory. We sent each other pictures of the sky like we lived under the same one. We shared playlists. We fell asleep on FaceTime with the phones breathing hot under our blankets like animals. Then we both admitted this was mostly pain with lipstick. The aftermath was quieter than I expected. People who hear this story split clean down that expected line. Half say, "You did what you had to do," and the other half say, "You could have saved her." Both sides are wrong, or at least incomplete. The part after is quieter. It's making rice for one. It's the slight echo in a hallway where there used to be a second pair of shoes. It's dreaming that your phone vibrates and waking up to a battery at 13% and no notifications. I kept the blazer because it still looks good. I deleted Instagram for a month because the squares were too loud. I found Lean's sketchbook under my bed and mailed it with a note that said, "Keep drawing." She texted a photo of the page where she'd drawn the coffee shop where we met, the door and the silly fern in the corner. She wrote next to it, "A place I'm not homesick in, eventually." Then, "I'm sorry I made us a cautionary tale." Madison tried to reach out once, sending a long message about how sorry she was and how she never meant for any of this to happen. I read it and didn't reply. Apologies are nice, but they don't reverse deportation orders or give people back the years they lose to bad decisions. If you need me to put on the accountant visor and talk law, fine. The bar is 10 years for a finding of fraud or willful misrepresentation. There are waivers, but they're threaded needles. Love is not evidence if the government thinks the intent was wrong at the jump. We didn't get married. Maybe if we had, we'd be watching Netflix in a crappy starter house with a window unit doing its best and arguing about whose turn it is to buy paper towels. Or maybe we'd be divorced because the first brick in that house would have been a lie. I don't get to know the counterfactual. I only get to live the one we picked. Last week, a package showed up with foreign stamps and handwriting I recognized. Inside, a t-shirt from her dad's coffee farm, Café de las Montañas, in a font that tried really hard. A little bag of ground coffee her mom roasts herself, and a print of a building I know she misses. Colonial architecture, painted in bright colors, with windows like eyes that don't blink. There was a note. "You told the truth and it hurt both of us. I am trying to be a person who can live with both halves of that sentence." I sat at my table and made coffee with beans that smelled like mountain air and cried like an idiot because there are losses you don't get better from. You get more fluent at carrying them. I know someone will ask, yes, she's banned from returning for 10 years. That's the number they write when they stamp the file. It looks both too big and too small. 10 years is a long time to be a grown-up. It's also 2 Olympics and a few iPhone models and a houseplant that will outlive your worst story. I hope hers does. YouTube just dropped this new hype feature. If you're hooked on this story, smash that hype button. It tells YouTube this video deserves to blow up, and it keeps even crazier stories coming your way.